questions. We'll have probably, well, we're supposed to be out of here in about 8 minutes. So you might have to ask questions upstairs, but let's try anyway. Yeah.
Yes. So I spent most of the last year learning about the urban low-income housing investing opportunity, which has been quoted time and time again as the biggest impact investing opportunity. But I don't see so much activity in that space. And I'm curious if you have any insights to why affordable housing isn't taking off on a much larger scale.
I mean, from my perspective, I would say the regulatory environment is not in favor of it, but I think you at Monitor have already done some profound work on it.
Yeah, so we've been working on that for 6 years in India. Lots of reasons. You know, when we first developed the model, we found that no one was interested in moving down market, right? So the problem with India is there's still so much activity and so much demand in the top of the market that getting developers to kind of go down market is actually very, very difficult. The first people we got into were small-time entrepreneurs putting up 200-300 units a pop. Since then, it's gathered momentum. There are now 50,000 units sold across India, and it's started to scale. We're starting to see corporates coming in. People like Mahindra come to us saying we'd like to enter the market. So it is starting to scale, but it's still very early days. It's quite a tough business, is what we've found. It was easier on paper than it ever was in practice. On paper, there were these nice IRRs and nice margins. On paper, you find land is hard to come by, especially if you're trying to find smaller plots of land closer to the center. You find that for the low-income segments, you need to be closer to transport, actually like public transport, buses or trains. For the higher incomes, you've got cars. You actually need to wrestle with regulatory barriers, so things take a long time to get permissions for. So there are all these real barriers on the ground. We actually get down to doing it. I don't know that everyone has called it the largest sector. It was the largest sector of the 5 that JP Morgan included in their analysis. And I think the issue with what's happened with that report is, first of all, everyone fixates on the 1 trillion number. And everyone forgets to read, the note that says based on 5 subsectors, right? So it could be a bigger number than that. I mean, they didn't consider all the sectors. It happened to be the biggest one of the 5 that they looked at. I think there are probably others. The thing I would say though about those kinds of extrapolations is when we spoke to JP Morgan, we didn't know some of the difficulties that we find in terms of the model actually scaling. And also the other thing we find with that number is it's not always easy to invest, right? So these entrepreneurs that are putting up these houses are doing it often from their own money. It's very difficult for them to borrow money from the banks to do construction. It's impossible to borrow to buy land. It's very difficult to get any capital in from overseas in India for this kind of activity. So whilst a sector, even if it scales, will use up a lot of capital, it doesn't mean that a fund sitting in London will be able to invest in that and be part of that story. So I think that's just one of those important things to bear in mind when you're thinking about the size of the market.
Hi, Walter Gibson. I think this is a fantastic framework, and I think you've done a great job in producing this. And I think it's great that OPES has started this impact fund in that space. I just wonder, is it a bit of a cop-out for the guys on the right-hand side to sort of rely on philanthropy when they've got, I don't know, what's the total impact investment going in at the moment? Is it 4 billion or something? More. I mean, is there not a way that they could actually stump up a very small percentage of their funds in the interest of stimulating deals, creating the pipeline? Did anybody ever talk to you about that?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of them are looking at that, and I think OPES is a sign of people doing that. In some ways, there is a bit of a blurry line. If you think about OPES and what it's trying to do, it is investing, but with a philanthropic base. So is it philanthropy or is it investing? What we're saying is that if you are going to do anything in the earlier stages, your capital's got to be more flexible. You know, if you impose a 10% or 20% return target in the early stage, it's going to be very difficult to make the economics work. You know, so you might be investing, but we're saying, you know, just maybe don't expect too much money back. You know, accept that there's going to be a high degree of risk, and that your return is not going to be commensurate with that risk.
I think there are more and more of these sort of incubator models like Martin was talking about starting up, and so the risks are going to presumably diminish over time. I'm not a financial person.
You know, I mean, over a long period of time, hopefully as the models mature,
yeah, that's one of the targets. But also I think, you know, one of the other things which is very important is not to try and chase after deals. You know, I think that's one of the key words. Because the whole of the financial industry and also a lot of the impact funds actually today, especially the private equity ones, they go after the deals. But here is not about deals, here is about business models. So you really to find the right business model, whether it works in India, whether it works in Africa, whether it works with one social entrepreneur or another. The point is to scale. So we're very happy whether we can provide the pipeline for bigger guys, for the business models.
I want to add something on this. I think at this stage, if I reflect where we were, when we were in a blueprint or validate stage, we are completely different right now. So we actually went initially when we started 4.5 years ago, we did a round of meeting, at least 10 or investors, some of the names here, some very India specific. What we found, they were asking us an Excel sheet, and honestly, coming from McKinsey, KPMG, we could make an Excel sheet, and we made an 18-sheet Excel workbook which worked. Everything was tightly linked. It was a brilliant plan, but we didn't believe in it. We told them we don't believe in it. Here is your Excel sheet. And they started at that time talking about IRRs and percentage stake and valuations, and we said we don't know finance, we work in consulting, but that doesn't make sense to us at least, and that's the reason we chose not to go with any one of them at that time. Bootstrapped for 3 years on our own, made profit. So I think at this stage, what we did essentially at that time to experiment was we wrote grant proposals, got capital in that way from people like ILO, Gates Foundation, etc. But the challenge with that capital was that it was very constrained. And it said, this is the grant proposal, now follow that. So if there were changes in it, we had to justify, and that's happened with FEM also to some extent. But the best thing with FEM has been that they have understood. They understood that it was going to be that way. And we had learned by then, by the time we worked with them, I think day one, I told Martin, this is a proposal on paper, don't take it too seriously. We are going to solve this problem. I think the mindset at that stage, if anybody wants to invest, has to be that this is the problem we are trying to solve. This is a social problem that we are trying to solve. And it can be in any part of the world. We were just discussing that there will be social problems even in developed markets, in developing markets. This is the problem we are trying to solve, and we will solve this jointly. Unless that mindset is there, I don't think any investment there will work. It cannot be about a business model. There may not be. You have to find a business model. I think we are at that stage in most of these things.
That's the exciting part, and that's about Swast and why we wanted to bring them over here so that they could show you their business model, because they have this entrepreneurial spirit. And I was saying before that we work with different legal entities. It's a totally different story when you work with an NGO to change this mindset from like a grant-seeking organization to an entrepreneurially minded organization. And this is why we, although sometimes it's not so easy to accept Sandeep's calls telling us that things have to be changed again, but at the end of the day, they're entrepreneurs, so they are invested in this company, and we understand that we have to be a lot more flexible when we work with NGOs, for example.
Is legal structure important for the investor? Is it important that the venture has a profit and a non-profit arm? Is that something you consider?
I wouldn't generalize it, but in some cases, of course, it makes a lot of sense because the non-profit arm can try things, can become a part of this enterprise which is able to pilot certain elements. And when we talk about Swast, we have a limited company which is doing the daily operations, and at the same time when we talk to Sandeep and Angkor and say we want to try, let's say, a water pilot, a water kiosk, this will probably be part of their non-profit activities. So this is a typical way of having both elements, and especially when you work with a startup company, I think it makes a lot of sense.
You always talk about scaling stuff up, and I wonder whether there's a tension that anyone's found between keeping a model flexible enough when you go to scale to make sure that people at the base of the pyramid, the consumer, will still engage with it because it's still relevant to them, but also then having the scale to be scalable.
Maybe I can make an example if it fits. When we were talking the other day at the dinner, so Dick told me that their model goes at break even when they treat 40 patients a day. So that is scale, okay? And I said, but come on, that doesn't look very nice because you give probably 3 to 4 minutes to these guys. So are you able to treat them correctly? And he said, well, actually, poor people want to be treated in 3 to 4 minutes because for them time is money. And rich people want to sit there and have a chat and take an hour, you know. It's different because they get paid anyway when they go to the doctor. That's part of the answer.
I think from our point of view, the kind of scale that we're interested in at Monitor is not companies scaling necessarily, though they may be part of it. It's about solution models scaling, right? Which could be one company, it could be many. You know, and if you look actually at the sectors that have scaled, you know, microfinance, contract farming, mobile payments coming up, you know, actually there's a whole energy, you know, there's a whole bunch of companies that have sprung up around specific models. And actually, like the water work that we're doing with FEM, we're working very deliberately with a field of slightly different players. Because to some extent, we don't really know which ones of those will be successful or most successful, or maybe different ones will be successful in different settings. You know, so I think you can take one model and try to get it down the line, but also allow for a diversity of players to do it.
I think on the other issue on scale, at least the way we also are thinking about it, and I can say for India that for most of these problems, it will be very difficult to find one model which will scale across time. And it's just simply to do with the complexity of India. It's not one country in that sense. It's multiple. The ground reality is different in terms of the way because the governments are different, the state governments are different. So what works in one is very unlikely to work in the other. So I think the way to scale would be to have more and more people do it and customizing it. So you'll have to have a certain degree of flexibility as you scale. But at the same time, I think making sure that we understand what the problem is. I mean, is the problem the same in the place where we are trying to scale it? Because if we try to scale a solution where the real problem is different or the consumer is thinking differently, then the model will not scale.
I would like to add just one more thing with regard to this whole discussion about scalability, and we discussed it this afternoon. I think it's too much discussion going on about scalability. A model has to scale. And looking at India, and I think you had this discussion yesterday with the OPEC Investing Committee, that it probably might sound disillusional for investors. In India, there are so many hundreds of thousands SMEs who will take care of the scaling anyway, because they will just copy a model which is successful, which of course is not in the interest of the investor at the end of the day. But that's probably the big difference between this, let's call it market, compared to the classical market.